Humans use languages to communicate every day in one way or another, and we have done this for a very long time. There is a huge variety of languages in this world, so many that rather unfortunately not a single person could ever learn them all. It's pretty difficult to find and put an exact percentage on how many people in the world speak a certain language, but English has risen to a top spot. This is no doubt due to the internet's influence among other forms of media and the presence of online spaces, joint with English becoming a common second language to learn or to be taught in schools. English is by far the most used language on the internet by now, and it comes as no surprise that English has started to dominate the gaming world. And behold, now we have this connection between learning languages and video games. The hobby of video gaming has dramatically increased in popularity since the 1990s. Instructions, dialogue, menus, etc. are all commonly nowadays constructed with English as the primary language. I also found the term lingua franca when writing this video, and English has become such thing. The meaning of the term is a language used for communication between groups of people who speak different languages, like the way real players within a game often use English to communicate with other real players in the game. Just remember, this wasn't a thing not that long ago. Time. Therefore, yes, there is a high chance that if you are playing a game, for instance on a platform like Steam, that you can pick English either for the voices, the interface, subtitles, and if you're lucky, even all three. And I'm not just talking about games made in native English-speaking countries either. You know, a lot of games have defaulted to using English in their creations. I've said the word English so much already. I feel very fortunate as a native English speaker and a video game fan that so many games are just readily available and often instantly available in the language I am most comfortable in. But over time, I have found myself becoming more and more intrigued. I am seeking out and desiring games with language differences, and this is what I have come here to explain in this video. You see, for a long time, I have been interested in games that use other languages or have their own fictional language, games that are made in other countries and have cultural aspects in them, and games that are set in other countries and immerse you in their world. I'm going to tell you something else now. I love language learning as a hobby, and here's a bit of backstory too because I'm just that generous. Surprise, surprise, my language loving journey did not start in school. The French and Spanish classes I had back then were I just wasn't excited to learn. It felt like a boring chore, truth be told, and I think I felt pressured into learning in a way that I just did not enjoy.
Bonjour! Unfortunately, that and chouette are all the French I know.
And in my eyes, I think immersion and repetition is important, you know, like learning a language like a child does. What I mean is constantly on a daily basis getting input from all over the place from the moment you're born and gradually learning how to output yourself. And when you do start outputting language, it's still not perfect for a number of years. I did not come out of school remembering a lot of French or Spanish, nor did I have any kind of fascination with languages. I never really understood the reason why we were taught. Around 14 years old is when there was this turning point. Through my daily internet browsing, hooray for the internet, I stumbled upon Japan and actually found out what the Japanese language is like. I was really taken aback. It was the first real time I actually recognised another language's script in the current world, and from that day I challenged myself to learn it. I kind of scrapped the idea of being taught most things in any sort of classroom setting. I find language as a whole fascinating, and knowing the absolute basics of a bunch of them brings me satisfaction. But in summary, it's very rewarding to learn a language, no matter how or what you use it for. Now yeah, maybe I did sacrifice some of my school studying in order to self-study Japanese at home, but I surpassed my school level French and Spanish fairly quickly.
¿Qué pasa? Welcome to Spain!
And that's because I studied Japanese in a way that was fun for me, including, drumroll please, video games. I used a lot of gaming videos and video games to help me study Japanese in an engaging way. Japan has a huge gaming market, as you probably know, and even though we get a decent variety of games brought over to the West, there are many Japanese games that never see the light of day outside of Japan. But even so, a lot of them do get a lot of love online. Even when fans can't understand anything or when there aren't any fan translations. And I think that video games that can make an impact despite any language barrier is, well, fascinating, to be honest. For example, I've seen love for Boku no Natsuyasumi, LSD, Dream Emulator, Police Noughts, and Sengoku Turb. And this is a point I'd like to make. A game does not necessarily have to be audibly understood for it to be enjoyable. Think about movies or TV shows. Subtitles are an amazing tool that allow us to enjoy media from other cultures, and alongside the context helps us be aware of what is happening in the story and follow what is going on to the best degree. And side note, visuals and context alone can be enough for a game. It's proved by a handful of games not having any language provided at all during the experience, like Limbo, Journey, Hyper Light Drifter, Gris, Absu. It's cool, it's very artistic. I will personally often have a Japanese game's audio in Japanese because that's just what makes sense to me, especially if a game has a Japanese setting like Shenmue or Nioh.
Who are you?
I dislike the company of drunk samurai.
Hey! I am no samurai.
So a common drunk. Even worse.
I've also played Final Fantasy with Japanese audio before, and it's fun. It's also fun to switch between English and Japanese and hear the differences. I don't know much about the world of translating, but you know, there's a lot of nuances you have to keep in mind, a lot of like cultural things you have to keep in mind. I feel fortunate that so many games are Japanese because it's very motivating for me personally, but you know, I think it's important as a human to at least expose yourself a bit to other cultures and languages. It's a great way to open up your world and expand your horizons. Take Yakuza, where a lot of the games don't even have an English dub, and it's an example of how authentic video games can feel. It's a wacky series, but you can get very engrossed in the Japanese culture and environments. I love the look of the streets, the arcades, the shops. It feels very Japanese, and therefore I want to hear the characters speak Japanese too. I own a decent handful of Japanese games, and I'm only an intermediate, or like an upper intermediate kind of in the language. I'm a bit rusty, so some of the vocabulary in these games goes way over my head. But I've still played a number of hours and had tons of fun with them because I just find experiencing the gameplay of these games and the visuals interesting, even if I can't understand 100%. And I personally like being able to say that I've had this first-hand experience of playing these games by myself, and plus owning them is pretty cool. I usually open up a game with an intention, and that intention is to listen to whatever language feels right. Thinking about less popular languages that don't get much attention, even if it's for clear reasons, I feel sad about that. It's important for players to feel a connection to the characters, understand there's this intended reaction, and there's a right language choice for that a lot of the time. You want as many people as possible to fully engage and enjoy a game, but it's also important to make sure that other countries and languages each get their spotlight and are represented in stories, along with all kinds of people. But yes, going back to Japanese games, there are many. So first off, bringing back examples from earlier, we have Boku no Natsuyasumi. It's a charming series that I have witnessed being given so much love, so much so that there's even parts on the Wikipedia page about it. The game has achieved a cult following both in Japan and internationally, despite having never been officially released outside of Japan. He praises Boku no Natsuyasumi for telling a kind of story that virtually no other commercial games have bothered to explore. Open-ended elements of the game are fulfilling, even for those without any specific nostalgic connection to rural Japan. And this is what I mean, this is such a unique game, and you can feel the sense of coziness, nostalgia, childhood, summer. All of those aspects are universal. Pepsi Man is a fun one, isn't it? Again, it has gained a cult following, and even though this game is considered to be a financial failure in Japan, it still gets a lot of love for its nonsensicalness and over-the-top nature. And I mean, if you haven't seen it yet, it's fun. The world needs more weird fun. And what's most interesting is that despite it being a Japanese exclusive, the game uses English.
You got here just at the perfect time.
I feel that for those Japanese developers, they chose English for a reason. It fits the game the best, whether the plan was for it to be released overseas or not. And this is the same with the game Poiny's Point, which is a very weird and surreal game, also with its dialogue fully in English. Language is also something you can experiment with, and I like it when Japanese games feature English and vice versa. Gift Pia is a GameCube game that I am genuinely surprised didn't make it outside of Japan. I did read it was planned to be released in North America, but sadly got cancelled. Apparently this game seemed too strange or something. Cowards. But I absolutely love the look of this, and I think you could feel joy just running around, exploring, experiencing. Colours are great. The game Romania is cool too, with its Japanese feel. In general, I like how video games can share an essence of another country with you, the player, no matter where you are. And I know for sure that we could all enjoy Pepsi Man. Moving on from Japanese games, I'm going to delve deep into other countries. I think it's really cool to explore games that are made in other countries, which is a lot of them, in fact. I think it's kind of easy to feel ambiguity about where a game has been made. I can see why a lot of developers would go for English. Take, for example, Ghost of Tsushima, a game that was originally crafted in English and then dubbed in Japanese afterwards. This is because the game was made by an American studio, the infamous devs to be exact, and I really had no idea. I kind of looked at his game and thought, ah yes, Japanese developer, very cool. No, of course now it makes sense to me why they would write the game in English, but because the game is set in Japan, I find myself desiring to play the game with Japanese voices. It's common for the majority of games to come with English audio, which in all honesty is a good thing. Of course it's a good thing, because the more people can experience a game, the better. But I just feel myself longing for more games with language differences. I want to hear more unique languages pop up so I can feel intrigued about a culture or the way a language sounds, or learn how a certain country's people communicate and interact. I don't know, I think in this day it's just very important to learn about other people and the way they live. So we have covered Japan. Now I'll go through all the other countries and languages I researched for this video. First up we have Czech. Kingdom Come Deliverance is a rare example of Czech audio being available by developers from the Czech Republic. The game is also set in the Kingdom of Bohemia, the Czech Kingdom, predecessor of the modern Czech Republic. I feel like this game, since it was very much advertised in English and made to reach an English audience, the English voices are very good. The Czech dub actually started out as a fan-made project and then became official. That makes it feel very special and kind of wholesome. This demonstrates that there is this desire for games to contain languages that fit their settings, and I think it's great that this dubbing was successful and that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 will also have a Czech audio option, so round of applause for that. I also found this indie game called Kvark. What I could see, you're in a fictional version of the 80s Czech Republic, and I think it's really great when indie game developers use their own culture and experiences to add to a plot and aid their storytelling. Also made in the Czech Republic, even though they are modelled around American cities, Mafia 1 and 2 and the Definitive Edition have Czech dialogue available. And I was looking at some comments, and a lot of Czech people say that in general the Czech voices sound better to them, with more vocal expression and emotion like a movie, and apparently some lines became instant classics there. A series I really like, The Black Mirror, is set in the UK, but the three have Czech voices, even though Black Mirror 2 and 3 are made by a German developer. For immersion, perhaps you'd want to go for the English dub, but I think similar to Mafia, Czech people are proud that this is a successful video game from their country. Also, shout out to Aminita Design, who have created successful video games of a surreal nature. They actually made the choice to not include languages in their games. The founder actually said in an interview, "First of all, I'm a poor writer, it's also more accessible and easier to localize and funnier." So, you know, not having any language in your game is definitely an option, but for a lot of developers I think communicating with dialogue between characters is a main focus, and they want it to be a main focus. For example, I found this game called Gerda, A Flame in Winter. I found this quote from a review, but it says, "A game that offers a fantastic experience for individuals interested in exploring the history of Denmark and the life of an ordinary nurse." So yeah, this game wasn't on my radar before, but because it's fairly rare to see Denmark as a location in video games, it's now definitely on my to-play list. I think having the option for native audio in a game like this is great for absorbing more of a culture. It's similar to if you watched the original audio of a foreign film versus an English dub. You take in more of a setting kind of more naturally when you listen to the original language. We also have Expeditions Viking, where the player takes on the role of a Danish Viking leading an expedition to Great Britain. I'm not sure if there are any Nordic languages spoken during the game, but I think it would be awesome if they, you know, had some thrown in there. If you like Vikings or Norse themed games, then this could be something for you. Don't worry, I mention some more a bit later. We also have the Hugo series of games based on a series from Denmark about a friendly small Scandinavian folklore troll. And did you know that Movie Star Planet is from a Danish company? Yeah, you know now. Really, there doesn't seem to be many games set in Denmark, especially with Danish culture represented, and it's a shame because I personally think video games are a great way to showcase your culture and the environment that surrounds you. And this reminds me of Trüberbrook, which is a really cool game set in rural late 1960s Germany. Another reason why I want to point out this game is because of its unique style, which is handmade miniature scenery. It's just a very distinctive style and worth checking out. Plus there's German, like I said. Being a lover of the point and click genre, I have noticed over the years that there are many point and click games made in Germany, and they usually come with a German language option. From what I could see, Germany really likes adventure point and click games for some reason. If you know why, let me know. I wouldn't necessarily play these games with German audio, since there are jokes and puzzles and lots of dialogue that probably works better when you do understand it all.
Dann wollen wir mal.
Now a full developer, Daedalic Entertainment, I've enjoyed giving the German audio a listen. There's Edna and Harvey, The Whispered World, Laponia, the Dark Eye series, and State of Mind from this developer. It's one of the games that is actually set in Berlin, Germany in 2048, and I think it would be cool if more point and click games involved Germany as a location. We also do have the Secret Files series, which does feature Berlin as a location too. If you're learning German, there's plenty of options basically. Gothic, Risen, and Elex are all also made by a German developer called Piranha Bytes, and they all have German audio. Out of these three, I've played Gothic, and to be honest, the English dub is kind of funny. I actually saw a lot of comments that this game is loved in Poland, and I read a bunch of different reasons why this could be the case, including being popular among Polish modders. Anyway, moving on from this, I have found this amazing looking game coming out in 2025 that I feel really excited about. It's called Island of Winds. And oh, look at this, there's going to be Icelandic audio available. What perfection. The game will be set in a fantastical world inspired by 17th century Iceland and folklore. I cannot wait to get this and to be surrounded by the Icelandic world and language and feel instantly teleported. In general, I think Icelandic is a really gorgeous language, and to see it appreciated and used in a game, for example like in Jotun, despite it not being from an Icelandic company, it just makes my heart really happy. It completely makes sense with the setting, and it wouldn't have been the same if they just went for English, you know, so it just adds a lot to the experience of the game. Icelandic is also the closest language we have to Old Norse. I feel happy that Norse mythology is very common in video games, for example Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which I'm playing recently, the Banner Saga, and God of War. I've been wishing that Icelandic would be represented in gaming more, and we are kind of seeing a small increase. For example, there's also the recently released Senua's Saga Hellblade 2, which is set in 9th century Iceland. Games that feature Icelandic or Old Norse tend to not actually be developed in Iceland. However, a game that was developed in Iceland is EVE Online, although it doesn't actually have any Icelandic as far as I'm aware, but still thought it was cool to mention. Something else that's cool is the game Blasphemous. The creative director has cited the religious art and iconography of Seville, Spain as a major influence on Blasphemous's story and design. And there's actually a good article about how language barriers and cultural influences led to the creation of Blasphemous 2. For example, it says, it was clear from the beginning that they would have to adapt it to an international audience, but even if the game released with an English demographic in mind, the art direction and overall tone were uniquely Spanish. With the sequel, the team was adamant that they preserved that identity in the writing as well, regardless of which language you choose to play in. You play as a character based on Spanish traditions, taking cues from local influences about religion and culture, and the scenery in the game draws from Spanish roots. They spoke on how they originally wrote Blasphemous' script in Spanish, but due to monetary and time constraints, the team opted to translate and record this script in English. English was the right commercial choice to make back then. However, Cabeza stood firmly with his roots for the sequel. I'm Spanish, I always write in Spanish first because, well, it's my language and what I'm comfortable with. And I think it's definitely interesting to hear them speak about this and be open about it. Game developers and the people making these games should be proud of their language and where they come from, and if they want to have their game in their language, then they definitely should. And we also have games set in Mexico, such as Red Dead Redemption, although I have seen some complaints about the quality of the Spanish. I read that it's not great. And has kind of lessened a level of immersion, but I do respect that there's some Spanish to begin with, much like in Resident Evil 4. I think over time there will be this great opportunity to be exposed to lots of different types of languages and dialects. I really like the developer Ace team from Chile who made Xenoclash, Rock of Ages, The Eternal Cylinder, and even if the games don't feature Spanish, I think in the future it would be cool to see developers use their own spoken language or dialect more. And there's also my Spanish coach, naturally. And on the topic of my Spanish coach, of course we can use video games to help us learn a language. A lot of people use games like Animal Crossing or The Sims to practice, and in general I think using video games as a tool to learn something about something is something worth keeping in mind. My Summer Car, a game that only has Finnish audio and is set in rural 90s Finland. I like the unique feel of this and I think it makes for this very intriguing experience. I read that the game accurately depicts much of Finnish culture and the many problems Finland was facing around 1995. There is also this blog post online explaining the cultural references if you want to know more. I think more video games should educate people about different cultures in a fun way like this. You know, we forget how much we can actually learn from playing video games and we could definitely use this to our advantage. And of course the really big one for Finland is Remedy Entertainment with Alan Wake, Max Payne, Control, but none of them have any Finnish support as far as I'm aware, but you know, that's okay, I can forgive them. I mean, I know Alan Wake does have some references to Finland, and also I love the janitor in Control, the way he throws in some of the Finnish language, there's some Finnish swear words in there, the way he talks is just great.
This house has a vermin problem. A bad one.
And I found some yet to be released Finnish indie games. Among the Trolls, for example, where you travel from the US to Finland to visit your grandparents and explore a vast world full of Finnish folklore and myth. And Sauna 2000, which I really personally like the look of so far. It says it's going to be this story-driven comedic sauna simulator / mystery horror game. Eat a Finnish sauna without actually going to Finland. I just love the idea, and it says the game will have full Finnish audio too, and for someone who loves being exposed to many different languages, this is a treat. Not so much of a treat though is the grim tale told in a plague tale, made by a French developer. But I think playing with the French audio in this game makes for an even more immersive experience. Set in 1348, the plague ravages the kingdom of France. You are pursued by the Inquisition through villages, devastated by the disease. Despite it being rather dark, I have heard many good things about it. Siberia is one of my absolute favourite French games, and I still need to play the latest release actually, but the start of the first game begins with Kate Walker being sent to a fictional French village, and then she goes on her way to different remote locations to discover her true destiny. The first two games are 100% point and click classics, and I think it's nice to just think about the place they came from and the work of Benoit Sokal specifically. Remember Me is a game I would like to say is very underrated. I really love this game. It's actually developed by Don't Nod, also known of course for the Life is Strange series. Remember Me is more clearly inspired by France though, with it being set in Neo-Paris. The style and setting of the game is really intriguing and memorable, and I recommend it. I also wanted to briefly mention Canada, since French is an official language there. We have the game Kona, which is set in northern Canada in 1970, where you are engulfed in an unexpected snowstorm. When the game was launching on Kickstarter, this was said on the page. For the French version of the game, the story is told by François Devos, an experienced storyteller who employs a style authentic for the character and time. For non-French speakers, we believe the game will be well worth playing at least once in its original language with English subtitles to truly appreciate the unique, authentic atmosphere of this rich historical mystery. I think also for non-French speakers, listening to the French gives you that sense that you are exploring a place where you feel like an outsider. And this game is appealing to me as well because I like snow. Speaking of mysterious games, we have the Polish game Darkwood. Darkwood takes place in a mysterious dark forest somewhere in Poland in the late 1980s, wherein the main characters have been trapped. A very unnerving game. The Witcher! The Witcher clearly has a lot of European vibes and architecture and fields. The games are based on the popular books by Andrzej Sapkowski. I believe for the first two games they were written and made in Polish, and I think it fits the style of the games very well. I think sometimes it's very hard to replicate that natural feel when you record a dub, and this also just creates a fantastic opportunity for other countries' actors and actresses to have a spotlight. This is the same for some games like I mentioned earlier, like Mafia. Apparently in The Witcher a lot of old and ancient Polish words are used, which adds a lot to the dialogue, especially for Polish speakers. I was just happily surprised that a lot of people seem to enjoy the Polish voices, and I think they like how it's acted and the sound of it, so I recommend giving it a shot. And of course I haven't forgotten CD Projekt Red in general, Cyberpunk 2077. I do like how languages are featured and used in Cyberpunk, and I think this is an example of using languages to create a big and realistic world. I like the creativity behind this personally. I've just never seen subtitles done like this before, and I think it's really cool. Putting in all these details is such a great way of expanding many different kinds of characters too. The devs Bloober team made the very dark cyberpunky game that is Observer, set in 2084 Kraków, Poland. The game doesn't have any Polish voices, but if it did, I would totally play it personally with Polish audio for the immersion. There is, Polish dotted around in the game though, which is something I kind of notice a lot with games from other countries. Like, it's almost like the language is an Easter egg instead of being a bigger part of the game. Recently I've been delving into Norwegian a bit, and it's super fun. I like the language a lot, I like how it sounds. There's this game called Through the Woods, made by Norwegian devs. It's a third-person Norse horror adventure set in the forest on the western shores of Norway that tells the story of a mother and her missing son. With that description alone, I think it would, be a shame not to experience the rare Norwegian voices we do get in games. Among the Sleep is a game too that has Norwegian audio, despite it doesn't say on Steam or anything, but it does say on Epic Games and PSN. So I read in an interview that the game includes a very well-known lullaby from Norway, although I haven't played the game fully personally, so I can't confirm when that is in the game, but this game is an award-winning first-person horror adventure which is said to have impressive storytelling. I personally think already Norway has made a handful of really great games. For example, my absolute favourite, The Longest Journey or the Dreamfall series. After I played this game for the first time and really loved it, I was actually quite shocked to find it was originally Norwegian, but I thought that was awesome. Draugen is a mystery game set in 1920s Norway. Hooray! Explore a forgotten coastal village in your search for your missing sister. Norwegian Game of the Year 2019. This is a game I've wanted to play for a while since it's made by a Norwegian studio and set in Norway. Looks really cool. We also have Manual Samuel. It's a game I beat recently actually, and it was kind of weird, but it was a lot of fun. There was this interview I saw with the devs, certainly inspired by things that the whole world likes. This is a fictional world. It's in Norway, but they speak English. The currency they use is euros. There are names that work everywhere, so we tried to give them as much Norwegian names as possible, but not too obscure for a global audience. Yeah, this is kind of linked to what I said earlier about developers having to keep their audience in mind with their games a lot of the time and how it affects the development process. I do wonder how much impact the game would have had if it fully embraced the Norwegian style, like fully Norwegian names and culture, etc. They also mentioned in the interview that the Norwegian gaming market is still very small, but there's a big indie scene developing, so I'm glad to see the optimism. And in time, I hope each country has their moment to shine, like Poland with The Witcher 3, and like with the Netherlands and Horizon Zero Dawn, which actually does have some nods to Dutch culture in it. I read this comment on Reddit that said something like, "It makes me feel connected to the people who made this game as individuals as well as a culture," which is beautiful. I think it's really nice when you're playing a game and you just feel that sense of recognition and familiarity, it's really nice. The Killzone games are also made by the same company that created Horizon Zero Dawn, so yeah, the more you know. I also found this game called Amsterdam, which seems quite funny. There aren't really any games I could find that are in Dutch and set in the Netherlands or a Dutch-speaking country. Maybe one day Amsterdam will be revived. So, sometimes I have started playing a game in English. It's easy to default to this. And after a while, sometimes I realised that another language is actually what I prefer. This happened to me earlier this year with Atomic Heart, made by a Russian dev. I started up the game with English audio, and then I had such a desire to change it to Russian, and I'm really glad I did. I could never go back. To be honest, a lot of people complain about the English dub anyway, so I just recommend playing it in Russian. Pathologic is a cult classic for sure, and it's from the Russian video game developer Icepick Lodge. Surprisingly, the game received negativity around its poor translation, poor English translation, and this made me think about how games can perform differently in other countries too, what one country may respond to positively, another may respond negatively. We also have the recently released Indica, a very unique game it seems. The game follows a Russian nun with the devil in her head who's on a journey through an alternate 19th century Russia. I do wonder how many people pick the Russian audio for this game, because I can imagine it adding a lot of atmosphere. And speaking of interesting, there's also this indie game called Who's Lila, a reverse detective adventure where you control your character's face. It's really quirky and just has this really unique presentation and mechanics, and it's been on my wish list for a very long time. I think it's also really interesting when games use facial expressions as a communication tool or mechanic. And I think also sign language should be in games more, just had that thought just now. The only other game I can think of that uses facial expressions is LA Noire, although I personally kind of suck at reading the facial expressions in that game. We've already had Norwegian, Danish, Finnish, so now it's time for Swedish. There's a lot of Swedish games, so open up your eyes. Is that a saying? Bramble the Mountain King is a grim adventure set in a world inspired by dark Nordic fables. Explore the beautiful yet dangerous and twisted land of Bramble in your endeavour to rescue your sister. There's a beautiful Swedish song in it too. I read that it's very special to Swedish people and it's sung every year by kids on the last day of school at the start of summer. And yeah, a lot of Swedish people say that the game has captured the wonderful and scary parts of their myths and legends, so highly recommend that. Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons. The game itself does use an imaginary language, and we will actually get into made-up languages at the end of the video. Franbo and Little Misfortune are from Swedish developers Kill Monday Games. The games are both very psychological, horror-y, and the games are set in the same universe. On Wiki, it says that Little Misfortune takes place on the outskirts of the fictional town of Open Fields, Sweden. So that's cool. I would also like to recommend Bad North. Despite it not having any sort of Nordic language in it, as far as I'm aware, it still has that very Nordic style, and you have to position and relocate your troops to fend off Vikings. It's a very charming game. And there's Valheim, again Norse mythology related, if the name doesn't give it away. A lot of people know Valheim. I also saw that the Swedish game Unravel is inspired by breathtaking, lush environments of northern Scandinavia. And when it comes to environmental storytelling, a lot of the time there's more of a focus on the narrative and exploration, the characters and the setting, which means that it's important to create an immersive story and world around the player. The environment can be the core of a video game story. For example, the Town of Light. The Town of Light follows Rennes, set in Italy in the first half of the 20th century. There is English audio available, but to me the Italian adds an extra layer of eeriness, similar to what I was saying earlier about kind of feeling teleported to another world. Exploring and interacting with the environment, you will relive the history of the main character through her confused viewpoint. The game has a strong narrative component, and from the same developer we have the game Martha is Dead, a dark first-person psychological thriller set in 1944 Italy, and there's Italian audio for this game too. And on the Steam page it does say, unashamedly authentic voice acting in Italian, the first indie game to launch using the native Italian language as a default setting for full immersion into the story and the characters, which, huge round of applause for that. That's amazing. It's kind of what I'm getting at in this video. Love that. Martha is Dead's setting and historical context are inspired by real facts and places that have been faithfully reconstructed. So in line with this, it makes me happy to see the developer put this importance on the Italian language for their game. Lastly, there's also Wheels of Aurelia, a narrative road trip game set in the roaring Italian 70s, and no matter what the reviews say, games are a great way of exploring a certain way of life that you may not know. And if a certain country or way of life does intrigue you, you can explore it in this way, which is fun, right? And you can also be exposed to lots of music. There's a range of genres and styles from all over the world. I love listening to music in different languages. You can just appreciate the rhythm, melody, and emotion. You could also play on Italian tracks on Assetto Corsa if you wanted. I find it really interesting that there really aren't that many games set in South Korea, but I wonder if it's because, you know, esports and multiplayer is fairly big there, maybe compared to single player, and also the influence of PC bangs and internet cafes. Of course we have games developed there such as MapleStory and Pangya, but wait, the game was known as Albatross 18 in America. Why? I do want to especially mention this Korean exclusive PS1 game called Manic Game Girl. To be honest, I just find it really, really cool and I wanted to throw it in here. Also from Korea we have White Day. I think the remake version is the version that's on Steam, but yeah, it's the notorious cult classic Korean horror, and there is Korean audio. Again, I kind of think playing horror games with whatever the native language is adds a lot to the experience. There's also White Day 2, also with Korean audio, but I don't think the game is regarded as highly. Staying on horror, we also have the Coma, which has Korean support, which I think, again, would definitely add a lot of immersion and therefore make the horror feel a lot more real and like you're authentically in the scary, spooky scenarios. Staying on horror, we have a Vietnamese horror called The Death, a psychological horror game which is very immersive because it's set in Vietnam and there are Vietnamese voices and there's a lot of folklore surrounding it. It's really unique. There's also an upcoming horror game called The Scourge, also set in Vietnam. The game will tell stories revolving around urban legends from the 1990s in Saigon, Vietnam. There's also another Vietnamese horror called Bloodfield, and what I've noticed over all of these games is that people commonly comment on the difference in superstitions, myth and perspective, and I think stories in these horror games are always interesting because of what they are based on. And I also saw a lot of Vietnamese people comment on the references to their home and culture, and it was just nice to see. On the Steam page it also says that the studio aims to create products that show the cultural identity of Vietnam and convey meaningful messages. Also, Flappy Bird was actually made by a Vietnamese video game artist and programmer, and most of us know how popular that game was and what happened to it. A game that was also removed from its platform is a game called Devotion, and yeah, it's no longer on Steam because of reasons. You can definitely read about it. When I watched this game being played, I felt amazed at this strong sense of feeling like I had been teleported to 1980s Taiwan. And I think games like this, part of the experience is that you feel like you've teleported. It's escapism. Your ears and eyes are just surrounded by a world you aren't necessarily familiar with. And I think that goes really well with horror, by the way. From the same developer, we also have Detention as well, set in 1960s Taiwan. It incorporates religious elements based in Taiwanese/Chinese culture and mythology. The game provides players with unique graphics and a game experience. This game particularly freaks me out. It's just very haunting, but it's definitely got that atmosphere right. The Bridge Curse Road to Salvation is a game I watched a full playthrough of, and it includes Taiwanese urban legends, and I just really like the style of this too, and the dialogue really adds a lot to the experience, like you're really part of it. And there's a sequel too, hooray! I think the characters are pretty realistic portrayals of university students. I mean, schools and university buildings can definitely be creepy at night time, and the location is recognisable to a lot of people, like a school, very, recognisable, they have similarities, but there are again differences between each country and the stories that you tell within them. Hello Kitty Roller Rescue was developed in Taiwan, I just wanted to mention that, I thought that was funny. The same devs were also part of the collaborative effort of developing Kung Fu Panda, the video game. So yeah, I think Taiwan is really growing in terms of its video games, so I look forward to the future. Anyway, going straight back to horror, we have some Thai horror games, Home Sweet Home and Araya. I personally think Asian countries are very good for creating horror games which kind of also show off their cultures and language and folklore. I really love this type of game, this type of look. For Araya, you're in a Thai hospital, and even though there is an English dub, I think for immersion again the Thai option is probably good. Same for Home Sweet Home, it's based on Thai myths and beliefs, so the Thai dialogue will probably feel more authentic. Of course, a lot of horror games can seem quite similar, but I think what can set games apart is the setting and culture they include. Even if there are gameplay elements or plots that are used often, the environment alone can make it a whole new experience. Krut, the Mythic Wings is a hack and slash game based on the 2018 Thai CG animated feature-length film. The game again includes some mythology, especially, Southeast Asian. Yeah, there's not too many games from Thailand either, but I think the games that do exist stand out and I hope there's a bright future for them. Positivity. Wow, continuing on with horror, there's lots of horror. Dread Out, there's a lot of Indonesian lore and the Indonesian setting. I think it makes sense to surround yourself with the Indonesian voices. Funnily enough, the sequel, 2, doesn't have Indonesian, it only has English audio, which is a kind of a shame. Amali is another Indonesian horror set in the daily lives of Indonesian society, and you experience how Indonesian myth, taboo and culture shape the course of your nights. The game was created by, at the time, undergrad students from Indonesia, so it's cool to see their project. And I like seeing and learning what scares people from other cultures. It can certainly combine with your own fears and kind of make this interesting feeling, and that's what I like about immersion when it comes to these horror games. Coral Island is another Indonesian title I wanted to mention here. Very nice, laid-back life farming sim game, which I think takes place on an island with many Southeast Asian features. And there's a space for the unbound, a magical adventure about two high school sweethearts set at the end of their school days, set in rural 90s Indonesia, where you can enjoy a relaxing atmosphere but also with a hint of the supernatural. The director of the game said he wanted to highlight his personal experience of growing up in 1990s Indonesia and wanted players to feel the same passage of time that he had experienced, and also that it was his goal to preserve his memories as an Indonesian growing up in the 1990s. Video games can be used as this kind of outlet, you know, especially indie games or solo developed games. You can really tell the story that you want to tell and share. Whatever has inspired you in life, you can project out into the world in this way. For example, take Transylvania. Every now and then we can see Transylvania as a location in games such as, you know, Castlevania and such. However, I have found this game where the developers are actually from Transylvania. It's cool to see them include their roots. It's called Gibbous, a Cthulhu adventure. Yeah, the game is clearly inspired by Transylvanian architecture. I'm not sure how much the Romanian language is part of the game, but in any case, I really love the look of this. We also have the game Yaga, where you smash, clobber and bash the murderous legends of Slavic mythology. The world of Yaga is a world steeped in Slavic folklore and ancient pagan beliefs. Yaga is an authentic love letter to childhood fables, and we don't see Slavic mythology represented in games too often, so I really love this. There's also this game called Grey Dawn, which takes place around the year 1920 in a remote village in England. However, you will often be transported to the beautiful world of Romania, which is inspired by the mysticism of Eastern Europe. It really looks like a beautiful game with some really stunning environments and a lot of Romanian specific objects such as flags, books, statues, etc. And the game also includes a lot of religious elements. And I haven't really mentioned religion yet, but of course religion can also be represented in games alongside people and everything else I've been talking about. You can certainly use religious and spiritual themes to involve the player more deeply into a story and into a game. Yeah, in general there are techniques you can use to provide a poetic and powerful experience. Some games give you a big freedom of choice, which includes dialogue choices and a range of dialogue systems, like in Disco Elysium. Disco Elysium was developed in the UK, but written and designed by an Estonian novelist, which is something I didn't know before trying to find Estonian games. I haven't played Disco Elysium yet, but apparently there is some Estonian in the game, like where you hear random snippets of radio transmissions or something, but I really wanted to play it, and yeah, it's cool that it has a link to Estonia. All of the city's beautiful people are brought to life with full English voiceover. Play characters against each other, try to help them, or fall hopelessly in love as each word is spoken to you with the appropriate accent and emotion. And even though this game doesn't use Estonian, it does put an emphasis on language and how you talk to people. There's also Buckshot Roulette, which is a very recent indie game that I've seen pop up all over the place, and there is Estonian support. We love to see it. Another indie game from Estonia is Death and Taxes, where you assume the role of the Grim Reaper. And staying on this indie game theme, we have Saint Kotar, a psychological horror detective game set in a cursed valley in rural Croatia. I think particularly with a horror setting, getting the player to feel immersed is such a key factor. Using a language in a horror game can play a part as a narrative tool, and I hope we can see Croatian and other less common languages featured in games in the future. There are also, a handful of games developed in Croatia, such as Bear With Me and Serious Sam, but there's not many set in Croatia or that use the Croatian language. There's a few languages in this list that aren't seen as often as others. Hungarian is also a language you don't see often. There's Umurjax Ring, an FMV point-and-click game from 2006 and available on Steam, fully with Hungarian audio. How cool, how neat, how Hungarian. There's also this game called Remorse the List, a classic survival horror game where the player must figure out what is happening in the little Hungarian town. There's like some minimal Hungarian on signs and posters. Funnily enough, this game released on my birthday. And staying on this topic of rarer languages to see, there's also Lithuanian. Crowns and Pawns Kingdom of the Sea has been on my radar for a bit. The story follows a girl from Chicago, unexpectedly receives an inheritance from her grandfather, a house in Lithuania. She sets off to Europe, but upon her arrival she is threatened by an unknown man demanding that she gives up her inheritance. I'll also mention Human Fall Flat is Lithuanian, just a little fact for you there. Anyway, let's go back to a language that has been seen a bit more in the gaming world. Ukrainian. I think, of course, when people think of Ukrainian games, the first series that comes to mind is probably Metro. The first game, Metro 2033, came out in 2010, and the story is based on the Russian novel with the same name. You can play the games with Ukrainian or Russian audio, but seeming that they're set in Moscow, maybe Russian makes more sense. Technically, the original language was Russian first, and I think it's most likely the most authentic. I personally actually forgot to change it from English audio, and I'll say the English voice acting can be a little bit awkward at times. I've also found this indie game called Ostrov, a city building game that puts you in the role of a governor of an 18th century Ukrainian town. It is still in early access, but it looks really cool and polished already. And we also have, of course, the Stalker games centered around Chernobyl, a mix of action, horror, survival and RPG elements in a dark Eastern European sci fiction setting. Stalker 2 is actually coming out in September this year, in fact, also releasing with Ukrainian audio. Video games can also depict real events, and video games can just be a way to relay information about history or a person, even if it's loosely based on something, which, I consider another cool way to just educate players about something as they play. For example, there's Kolat and Just Cause, which are based on real things. And I've mentioned a few already, but I enjoy games that are based on real places. Another example of this is Kowloon in Hong Kong. Games that are set in Kowloon include Kowloon's Gate, Paranormal HK, and more recently, Welcome to Kowloon. For Hong Kong in general, I really like how Sleeping Dogs looks. It also includes some occasional Cantonese here and there, and even though there could have been more of the language used, maybe I still think they depicted Hong Kong well, and the atmosphere in the game in general is amazing. I really enjoyed driving around and walking around. The game Paper Dolls is a game from China and also set in China, where you play as a character deserted in an ancient Chinese mansion. Paper Dolls 2 also continues the story, and I think they both share the unique side of Chinese horror. We also have an upcoming game called The Bustling World, which will be an open world RPG set in ancient China. The style of it looks really neat. And there's another game I found called Thriving City Song, where you experience the history of the Song dynasty brought to life and live through the rise and fall of the empire. In general, I've seen a lot of games also use Asian characters in their games, especially for, this cyberpunky or futuristic look, and I think there are many reasons why this is the case, and we are now coming to the last few, but let's do this in a quick fire way. So, Turkish, the Mount and Blade series, they are definitely up there as the highest rated video games from Turkey, and I think a lot of people have heard of Mount and Blade, so that's cool. Kolpa Inata is a Turkish point and click game I've played. I think the game is also inspired by a Turkish novel, so yeah, I enjoyed this one personally. I also found this random Turkish game called Kabus 22, which was a fun find. This is a horror action game set in Istanbul. Hindi, I saw the game Kamla pop up, and it's very unique to see an Indian game. It's set in 1980s India. Also made in India, we have the game Unrest, set in a fantasy interpretation of ancient India. Slovak, there's this game Felvidek, quote, a JRPG set in 15th century Slovakia. I like the style of this a lot. Romansh. There is this game called Mundown I found made by a Swiss dev. The dialogue in the game is spoken in the language Romansh, which is again very, very unique, and I like the style of this one as well. I do love the range of styles of games we have here in this video. More dying and rarely spoken languages can be kept alive via video games. It's a great way to preserve them, in my opinion. Swahili, Tales of Kenzara Zhao, is said to be remarkably different to anything else on the market, released this year in fact, and it certainly sounds great with it being narrated in Swahili. Before we end the video, I just want to say that also making up your own language for a game is a really neat way of making your game seem more personalised. For example, take games like The Sims, Animal Crossing, Ico, and Shadow of the Colossus. There's also Papo and Yo. Said by the developers themselves, they speak a composite language inspired from the various languages spoken across Latin America. And there's Jade Empire, where many characters in the game speak Thofan, a 2,500 word Asian style constructed language. And don't forget, there are also games that use linguistics, or language in general, as a mechanic or theme. For example, Heaven's Vault, where an entire ancient hieroglyphic language awaits to be deciphered. Chants of Sonar, in which you observe, listen and decipher ancient languages. And finally Totem, where you are tasked with translating and conversing with unidentified entities. And yeah, so there we have it. It's the end. I think with many games, even if developers set their game in a certain country or stylize it a certain way, certain aspects of how they grew up and the country they live in and their native language can definitely slip through. And I think someone's life experiences and the way they communicate can definitely leak into creative projects, art, or music, or film, even when it's not intentional. Everyone has their own personal view on things, and I really enjoy noticing these subtle differences with games and how they share their different viewpoints and perspectives on the world and how they interpret emotions and communication and stuff. I'm sorry if I missed out any languages or games or countries. I will potentially make another video like this. I wasn't expecting it to be so long, but you know, maybe I'll focus more on specific languages or something. And of course there are also multiple countries that speak English, so maybe I can do games from Australia, New Zealand, US, UK, etc. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to check out my Patreon if you would like to support me. Thank you. Bye.